Let's go back to receivers, but now connect it to a specific topic that we wanted to explore on the show. Preseason watch lists. They're out. And so we start with the Biletnikoff Award, given to the top receiver in the country, and something very interesting, and I would also say bizarre. Tell us about it, Ethan.
Yeah, so the USC wide receiver room, a couple of really interesting narratives in terms of the Biletnikoff watch list, and that's that Makai Lemon is on it and Jacoby Lane is not. So first and foremost, the good news, you got Makai Lemon on it, and I think that's well-deserved. I think based on the potential he showed last year, having some of those games where he had 10 catches and, 150 yards-ish, he's the kind of receiver who put on, he wasn't consistently like this, but put on performances reminiscent of guys like Jordan Addison and Drake London, who, no matter how the rest of the offense was running, he was going to get the ball a lot and he was going to put up a lot of yards. I think that's why people are a little bit more confident in Makai Lemon than Jacoby Lane as like a surefire star receiver, is because he, regardless of the game, was putting up a lot of yards, was, racking up a lot of catches. He's a guy who, like I said earlier in the show, just get him the ball in space and he'll make something happen. So, obviously had some time as a returner as well last year after they took Zachariah Branch off of that. So, great. I think that he's a guy that the whole country should be watching for the Biletnikoff, especially if USC's offense is running well. So, well-deserved there, obviously. And then, but you move to Jacoby Lane, who's not on it. And it's just really interesting because it feels like every time we talk about Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane on the show, it's as a unit. And they're always talked about together, like the top two wide receiver prospects in the NFL draft by Pro Football Focus was one topic that we talked about where they were right there. I believe Makai Lemon is like a 90 overall in the new college football came in, and Jacoby Lane is an 89. Like they seem to be like A1 and A2 in terms of, they're this duo. They're always talked about together. So to see Makai Lemon kind of definitively ranked ahead of Jacoby Lane is really interesting. I do think USC themselves has kind of contributed to this narrative. I mean, you send Makai Lemon to media days, you don't send Jacoby Lane. I think that that's a clear sign who, USC believes is their number one guy. Because I think it would have been interesting actually to see them at media days as a duo. Obviously, that gives you one less spot to give to Elijah Page, Kamari Ramsey. You have to figure out which of those guys isn't going to go. But I do think that, as someone who's been around the team a lot of the home games, especially, and has seen Jacoby Lane's personality, he's like a really fun interview and like a guy who would have made a lot of sense to have put in front of a microphone in terms of a guy who's, not going to mouth off about the team and say things he's not supposed to, but is also, kind of interesting and is going to bring some more ice to your program just with his personality. I also, I've been seeing the videos of him every single day that he enters practice. He does this like trademark yell and is always like drawing a lot of attention to himself. And he's just more of a flashy guy. So it's interesting that they sent Makai Lemon and not him. But I think just all of this does speak to Makai Lemon is the guy preseason who people have more confidence in. And I don't, that is no bearing, obviously, on Jacoby Lane's ability to produce. He shouldn't feel like, oh, I'm the number 2 wide receiver, so I'm going to produce like the number 2 wide receiver. If he goes out and has a number 1 wide receiver kind of season, no one's going to be disappointed. Everyone's going to be very happy for him. But I do think that just based on their profile as receivers, and I think also something that is interesting to note about Jacoby Lane is just that a lot of his production took place in the last couple of games of the season. And so people don't know if that was just like a hot streak of his, if he can produce like that on a full season, kind of scale, if opposing defenses are going to figure him out a little bit and figure out how to defend him in the red zone, because all of those things could be true. Makai Lemon, like I said earlier in the show, also wasn't necessarily consistent, but he put up good performances at different points in the season where he showed throughout the season, like, okay, in game 2 or 3, I can produce well. In game 6, I can produce well. In game 12, I can produce well. Like, even though it was a roller coaster, like, he's still a good wide receiver who can put up good performances regardless. So I just think all of that kind of is the reason why people are more confident in Makai Lemon. I'm sad that Jacoby Lane was kind of snubbed from the list, but I don't think it's, an indictment of him too much. As the storyline here, I think, is just people are rightfully more confident in Makai Lemon. But, I'm sure you have some very insightful thoughts on this as well, Matt.
Well, it is just, as the Agatha Christie character Hercule Poirot would say, it is a very curious case, n'est-ce pas, that one of these elite receivers is on the list, the Biletnikoff list, and one is not. Like what is really going on there? Because just about every USC fan thinks, these are both rock stars. It's not like there's one here and there's one a notch below. Like we both think they're studs. So from a USC standpoint, it's really weird that Lemon's there and Lane isn't. But hey, and this is something we're going to talk about later in the show too. It is free motivation for Jacoby Lane. Left off the list. Oh, I think I might try to have something to prove, right? So, more on that theme, free motivation later in the show. All right, moving along with other watch lists. 3 USC running backs on the Doak Walker Award watch list. So without even naming the names, just that fact, 3 USC running backs on the Doak Walker preseason watch list. Does someone have some inside intel or info? Like, is Lincoln Riley going to be pounding the rock as much as USC fans hope he will? Because how do you get 3 running backs, all those mouths to feed, all on the watch list? I mean, geez, if USC is walking away from this 2025 season with 3 studs, like 3 running backs who shine and demonstrate how good they are, that means USC's in the playoff as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really cool to see. I think it kind of goes back to a comment that Lincoln Riley made really recently about how this is the deepest running back room he's had. And, people kind of go back to a lot of his more recent running back rooms at USC, and there was clearly more established stars, clearly, more established number 1 guys. You had Travis Dye, came in as the number 1 guy. It was obvious. Then you had Marshawn Lloyd, clear number 1 guy, obvious. And then you had Woody Marks, clear number 1 guy, obvious. And, all of those guys were very clear number 1 guys, like I said, NFL prospects, the like. And then this year, I think, there's a less clear number 1 guy. Some people say it's going to be Waymond Jordan. Some people want to give Bryan Jackson the rock more because he's been around longer and, he had the performance in the bowl game. Eli Sanders also in the mix. Spoiler alert, those are the 3 guys who, are on the watch list, obviously. But I do think that this is a similar situation to what we talked about just a little bit ago about the defensive line, where none of these guys are guys that you can confidently say this is going to be USC's number 1 running back and they're going to be the best running back or compete for the best running back in the Big Ten like Woody Marks did last year. But you could dream about all 3 of those guys doing that. And I think that, should be an indication to Lincoln Riley, first and foremost, that, props, the rest of the country to some degree thinks that you're right. And this is a deep running back room. But second of all, mix it up a little bit more, because USC has had some talented running backs and guys like Raleek Brown and guys like Quentin Joyner, who are number 2 guys who seem to have a lot of potential and who Lincoln Riley didn't give the ball, and then they ended up transferring elsewhere before we really saw a lot of that potential realized. And, a lot of people think Quentin Joyner is going to be really good for Texas Tech this year. So it's going to be a real bummer for USC fans to see if that's true. But it'll make it a lot easier to swallow if all 3 of these guys are studs and Lincoln Riley kind of rotates through them, in situations where it makes sense to use them. I think an interesting note here is USC is tied for the most candidates on the watch list with 3 other teams: ECU, Notre Dame, and Temple. Notre Dame, obviously the big highlight there because that's a big rival. USC's ECU and Temple, kind of random, but hey, maybe they have deep running back rooms as well. Don't know too much about them at this point, but yeah, I think, just briefly touching on all 3 of these guys really quickly. Waymond Jordan's a guy who just put up monster numbers, basically won the Heisman for JUCO. So he's a guy you can obviously dream about. If he can put up, like 60% of the numbers he put up in JUCO, he'll be a stud, obviously. And then, Bryan Jackson puts up a very, very solid, very gutsy performance in the bowl game against Texas A&M. If he puts up similar performances against similar top programs, people are going to love that. Eli Sanders is a guy who, has been a very solid, consistent performer in the Mountain West and kind of similar schools. So again, if he can put up like similar numbers to what he did there and, even take a step forward with better coaching, people would love to see that. So again, just all guys that have done something that inspires belief in them. And it's just a situation where, like I said, you can't definitively say that any of these guys are going to be the number one guy who's going to, dominate the Big Ten, but you can dream about all of them being great guys. So you can also dream about a situation where they all have incredible seasons and they all are worthy of awards consideration, which, would be great. I think you can also dream about a situation where one of them runs away and is the number one guy clearly and, is deserving of awards consideration, and the other two are very solid backups. We'll see what happens, but very excited to watch all of them play. Very excited to see how Lincoln Riley utilizes them for sure.
We remember 2022, Travis Dye was, a superstar. He was a game changer for USC, so it made sense to lean on him. Woody Marks last year, total baller. Like, why wouldn't you give him the rock a lot? But and this might be where being in the Big Ten as opposed to the Pac-12 really does change the thought process for Lincoln Riley. I think you hit on this essential point earlier, that what USC fans want to see, in addition to leaning on the run game more, is give the RB2 a significant chance. Give the backup a significant amount of carries, not just to see what he can do, but also to keep the RB1 fresh in the middle and latter stages of a rugged, grinding Big Ten season. So even if there is a number one who really clearly establishes himself, there's still a need to be getting touches to your number two and your number three so that the number one is fresh. You don't want to run your top running back into the ground by mid-season so that the tank's empty or he's taken too many hits. You want to be rotating regardless of number one. Now, obviously, you put the number one in for the biggest plays. It's a callback to the 2006 Rose Bowl against Texas when Reggie Bush was not on the field for 4th and 2. But in terms of overall snaps, overall allotment of workload, hopefully Lincoln Riley is going to adjust fundamentally his view of the running back room. Instead of leaning on one guy, rotate carries, rotate touches, make sure that not only you're getting a look at your full room, which has a benefit in and of itself, but you're keeping guys fresh for the middle and latter stages of the season. So another really important point about this running back room at USC. All right, final notes on the watch list season for the Trojans.
Yeah, I think I saw that Eric Gentry is also on the Butt Kiss watch list. So that's obviously something to watch there as well. He's, a guy who, when healthy, is one of the best linebackers in the country, rather. But, that's obviously always the big story. The big issue is health. You also have Cade Chittenden, which is the kicker that they got in as a guy on the Lou Groza Award watch list. So that's really awesome. Glad to have a little bit more preseason confidence in the kicking game after the way that last season went. So excited to see what he can do. And then a little just interesting tidbit here, going back to the defensive line, just really quickly. You had a really interesting award watch list for USC, which was you have Jide Abasiri on the Athletic 2025 Freaks list, which recognizes the most athletic players in college football. Jide Abasiri, obviously a guy who was here last year, didn't contribute a ton yet, but is 6'5", 290, and runs almost 20 miles an hour at nearly 300 pounds and squats nearly 700 pounds. So that's the reason why he's on that list. Another just kind of cog in the wheel of, hey, the defensive line has a lot of, talented, big, fast exciting prospects. Jide Abasiri is another guy who's, you can kind of count in there. So, kind of a fun, interesting watch list there, not a traditional one, but another one that, should make USC fans excited. So guys all over watch lists everywhere, excited to see if they can kind of live up to the hype. I'm sure some of them, at least some of them will. So, it just makes me more excited for football season for sure.